Zerubbabel is the one who laid the foundation of this temple, and he will complete it. And you will know that the Lord of heaven's armies has sent me. Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin, to see the plumb line in Zerubbabel's hand. And I just think about like what it's trying to do to get to the place of where we're at right now as a church, and it has been small beginnings, and nothing has stopped God from building this church. COVID has not stopped God from doing that. Um, God has just, it's been incredible to see the work that God has done just over the past several years to bring us to this point, and it's just such a sweet moment, and I just want to praise God. And the focus is not on Zerubbabel, okay? The focus is on the Lord, and we're going for this church. That's where it all needs to be. So let's let me pray. Lord, we thank you that nothing can stop your church, Lord, from going forth in the world, Lord. That not even the gates of hell will prevail against your church, Lord. I think as Christians, we've been a bit fearful, Lord. We've seen the world kind of turn away from you and plunge really into darkness, Lord. We've seen the scandals in the church, Lord. We've seen all kinds of things go on in our world that, being honest, make us feel like you are powerless, God. God, help us not to project our own powerlessness on you, all powerful one. Let us remember, God, just through this moment today, that you are able, that you can, Lord, that nothing can stop your will from going forward, Lord. God, I pray that we would be people of faith, that we would be salt and light in a world that seems to be moving closer towards darkness, Lord. I pray that we would never allow that to discourage us, but Lord, we would allow that to strengthen us, that we would have courage, Lord, that we would be bold witnesses in our world. God, you saved us and brought us and caused us to live in this time of history for such a time as this, Lord. But give us the grace to be able to lead the church, Lord. I pray that you open our hearts and minds, Lord, to today's message, Lord. I pray that we would have clarity about what's really important, Lord, about eternal things, Lord, not just temporal things. Help us to put those things in a proper perspective, Lord, so that they can perform their proper function in our lives. God, I pray that you would speak through me. The book is very nuanced as we get deeper into it. Help me bring clarity to those nuances, Lord. I pray that your Spirit would illuminate truth to our hearts, Lord, convict us, challenge us, Lord, encourage us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. John chapter 1, verses 37 and 38, Jesus asked his disciples a very provocative, piercing question. He says to them, what are you seeking? Have you ever thought about that? What am I seeking? I wonder if Jesus were to ask you that question, what are you seeking? How would you answer that question? Some people are seeking money. Some people are seeking success, however they define that. Some people are looking for the approval of others. Some are seeking security and comfort and happiness and satisfaction. But they can't get no satisfaction. Some of you caught that. Because they are searching in all the wrong places. The title of today's sermon is Seeking This, Not That. And we're going to continue in our series. Areas in which people try and find true meaning and ultimate purpose in. And he's going to talk about wisdom, he's going to talk about pleasure, and he's going to talk about work. Okay, and from
these 3 areas, he's going to draw out conclusions for us to consider about where true meaning and purpose are found in life. So Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 12, and then I'm going to read both of his sort of musings on wisdom there, which is going to cause us to move over to chapter 2, verse 12, and read through 16. Clear as mud? Okay. All right, I'm going to read those 2 passages, and then we'll get to our first biblical truth for this morning. So starting in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 12, it says, "So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there was more gain in wisdom than in folly." So not all wisdom is bad, "as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness." Am I reading chapter 2 first? I am.
Yeah.
You guys are on it. Every time I'm off, and every time you guys are so good about this. We'll go back. I'm like this doesn't seem like chapter 1, verse 12. All right. Lord help us. All right. Chapter 1, verse 12. "I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that is given to the children of men to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. And I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow." Now let's go over to chapter 2, verse 12 here, and we'll read to verse 16 there. He's going to have some more things to say about wisdom. "So I turned to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done." In short, he's saying, I've already done everything under the sun. "Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a striving after the wind. Why seek this, not that? Well, seek godly wisdom, not worldly wisdom. That's the first point in your outline, first biblical truth. Seek godly wisdom, not worldly wisdom. So what is Solomon doing here? Well, he's conducting an experiment with his heart. Biblically speaking, the heart is the innermost being of a human being. It's a person's mind, emotions, and will. And what he's going to do is he's going to seek and search out with his heart if there's anything really worth living for in this life. Can wisdom make this life worth living for? Can pleasure make this life worth living for? Can work make this life living for? He's going to start here with wisdom, and he's going to bring us along in this experiment. And what he's hoping to do is to discover what is worthwhile done under the sun, what is worth living for. Now I want to compare and contrast here godly wisdom with worldly wisdom. And there's this dynamic and this interplay between those two things. Worldly wisdom gives us a false sense of hope. Okay? Worldly wisdom says you can find satisfaction in earthly pleasures. You can find self-esteem in accomplishment. You can find unconditional love in human relationships. This is what life's all about. Seek all of these things because that's what ungodly wisdom tells you to do, that you will find meaning and purpose in life in these things. Well, godly wisdom comes along and exposes the vanity of those things. Now, here's the paradox, right, of godly wisdom, is that by exposing the vanity of pursuing those things, it actually leaves you depressed. It puts you in a place of sorrow because you're told by the world that these things are supposed to satisfy you, that they're supposed to bring ultimate and true meaning to your life. But then godly wisdom comes along and just cuts that all out. Godly wisdom, even according to Solomon here, exposes that. And it leads to sorrow and depression. It's kind of like being a Broncos fan. or Bears fan. Okay, Bears fan. Okay, he goes on to say, I have more wisdom and knowledge than anyone. Let me tell you about wisdom, about godly wisdom, about worldly wisdom. He goes, some problems in life can't be solved by wisdom. It doesn't matter how much godly or worldly wisdom you have. There are some things in life that are just a mystery, the problem of evil and how God uses evil to ultimately for our good and what awaits us in eternity when we endure a suffering for righteousness' sake. When we're looking at that, it doesn't make sense to us, but it's a mystery and God uses it. But he says that problem goes unsolved. Even in our world, there's just simple things like we have medical advancements, right? And sometimes we get so proud of ourselves and the things that we do, yet we don't have a cure for cancer. And so he's looking at our world and he's saying, what good then is wisdom anyways? If we have these mysteries and we have these unresolved hardships, what good is that type of wisdom? He also talks about the results of worldly wisdom here in verses 17 and 18. He says that worldly wisdom is madness and folly. Worldly wisdom results in a boastful arrogance that sets itself up against God. But in the end, it only increases in sorrow. We see this not only here in Ecclesiastes, but also in the book of Genesis. In the very beginning, in Genesis chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, I'm going to read this to you. It says, for God knows, this is Satan actually talking to Adam and Eve, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. What kind of wisdom did they receive? Did they receive godly wisdom that leads to joy, or worldly wisdom that leads to sorrow? They received a worldly wisdom that leads to sorrow. Here's the thing about worldly wisdom. And any wisdom that is derived independently of God or even in opposition to God is of no value. It's no wisdom at all. So is all wisdom meaningless? Not at all. There is a godly wisdom that is very meaningful. He even says that in chapter 2, verse 13. He said, there's more to gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more to gain in light than in darkness. When compared to worldly wisdom, a godly wisdom wins every time. He even says there that it's in verses 15 and 16 in chapter 2, that godly wisdom causes a man to see the end of his life, which is death, and he prepares for it accordingly by living now for eternity. Summarizing what he is saying there. So why seek godly wisdom? Well, there's great value in godly wisdom, but let me give you 3 more reasons to seek godly wisdom. Here's the first reason. Godly wisdom guards you. Proverbs 4, verse 6. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 6 says, do not forsake her, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guard you. Do you want to avoid a bad business deal? Do you want to raise your children right? Do you want to discern ungodly advice? Then seek godly wisdom. It guards you. Here's a second thing that godly wisdom does. Godly wisdom brings hope. Proverbs 24, verse 14 says, "Know that wisdom is such to your soul. If you find it, there will be a future, and your hope will not be cut off." Have you ever found yourself seeking something in this life only to find yourself in a place of hopelessness, a place of despair? Well, godly wisdom brings hope. It clears up confusion. It calms fears. The good news is that godly wisdom always brings hope. And all you have to do is ask God for that wisdom. He gives it generously. There's a third thing that godly wisdom does. Godly wisdom saves your soul. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 24 says, "But to those," this is in the NLT, "but to those called by God to salvation, both Jews and Gentiles, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God." Christ crucified is the wisdom of God for those who are being saved, and folly to those who are separated from God. When I think about worldly wisdom, I can't help but think about Steve Jobs. And I came across this article this week in Inc. magazine, and Steve Jobs was sharing some of his worldly wisdom, with the world. And what he was saying is I came across this one tool, and it was just the most important tool that I could ever come across to help understand and make the most of my life. Well, what was that tool? I'm going to read it to you. He says here, "Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to make me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear, embarrassment, or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. Here's his conclusion. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart." What a profoundly wise approach to life for an unbeliever, to consider your death each day and the implications of that death. But what an utterly foolish conclusion to say that the meaning and purpose of life is to follow your heart and to live your best life here and now. Moses offers us some other advice, some superior advice in Psalm chapter 90, verse 12, when he says, "Teach us, Lord, to number our days." And not for the purpose of living your best life here and now, but that we may gain a heart of wisdom, that we may consider the choices we're making today in light of their eternal consequences. That's true wisdom, and that's where true meaning and purpose are found in life. So are you making choices in light of eternity? Are the choices that you're making today ones that are going to reward you for all of eternity? Ones that will bless you and others now, but also bring glory to God for all of eternity? If the answer is yes, then by God's grace you have discovered true purpose and meaning in life. Let's pick it up in chapter 2, verse 1 there. Seek godly wisdom, not worldly wisdom. I'm going to read chapter 2, verse 1 through 11 there. I think I'm in the right chapter now. All right, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. And this is going to be about his pursuit now in pleasure. So we're going to leave wisdom and move to pleasure. And he's going to see if he can find something worth living for in the pleasures of life. So he says in verse 1, "I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity." That was quick. "I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold of folly. till I might see what is good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers and both men and women and many concubines, the delight of the sons of men. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart with no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and all the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. That leads us to our second biblical truth. Second point in your outline: seek godly joy, not sinful pleasures. Seek godly joy, not sinful pleasures. He's going to try to transform his environment in an attempt to facilitate his enjoyment of life. He's going to try and change all the things around him in the hopes of finding something worth living for. And notice what he indulges in there. He cheers his body with wine. That's in verse 3. He builds just great monuments. He has great work. So he builds pools and gardens and buildings of all various kinds. Everything that men try to do under the sun, right? He amasses a huge fortune, and he indulges in sinful sexual pleasure, which he calls the delight of men. Now, not all of these pleasures were sinful, right? Some of them were and some of them weren't, right? But then he says in verse 10 here, whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. And then what was his conclusion? Well, we see in verse 11 there, the payoff of sinful pleasure was not worth all the time, money, and energy that he had expended in order to try and find what would be worth living for. I mean, just imagine the emptiness. Imagine how he felt as he just gave his heart to everything that he could ever want in life. But are we doomed to a pleasureless existence? No, I don't think so. I think that actually God has created us to enjoy things in life, even in our brief existence here on earth. But what is it? What is God? Is it that God has caused us to enjoy? Share with you right after this brief commercial break. Just kidding. It's seeking godly joy. It's seeking godly joy. There are pleasures to be had in this life, but those pleasures are found not in sin, but in Christ. And we see in chapter 2, verse 26 there, it says, for to the one who pleases him, God has given him wisdom and knowledge and joy. Joy is something that God wants us to have, but he wants us to have it from him. Godly joy. Well, what is godly joy? What does that even mean? Well, in the Old Testament, the joy is found in the presence of God. So wherever the presence of God was, the Israelites experienced joy. In the book of Proverbs, joy is upholding justice, living a righteous life, and promoting peace. In the New Testament, joy is the unexpected and undeserving experience of God's grace in your life. The sinner seeks joy through sinful pleasures, which the teacher refers to as madness and folly, a chasing after the wind. I'm reminded of this story. It's actually a scene from a movie, and Please don't send me an email about how bad this movie is, okay? But it's the movie Elf by Will Ferrell. And we watch it every year as a family. And there's a scene in the movie where Elf, who's a real elf, okay, he knows the real Santa, okay? And Elf goes to New York to find his biological father. And he's in New York and he's working at this toy store. And he finds out that Santa is gonna come to the toy store. And he just freaks out, And so he gets all prepared for Santa. He builds his whole Lego city and stuff like that, and just makes this whole store really beautiful and well decorated, okay? And then he shows up to work the next day, and Santa's there, but Elf knows right away it's not the real Santa, okay? And he's not happy about it. So at first, he just approaches him, is real gentle about it. He's like, "You're not the real Santa." He's like, "Tell me this then. What is Santa's this?" And then the guy just answers it because it was an easy question. And then he keeps kind of prodding him. And by this time, all the kids are here in the audience, okay? And everyone's ready to just kind of tell Santa what they want for Christmas. Well, Will Ferrell is not having this falsehood, right? So he actually leans over into Santa's face and he goes, "You sit on the throne of lies." And then he rips his beard off his face, and Santa jumps up and tackles him into the Lego set, and the kids start screaming about what's all taking place there. And it's a totally chaotic situation. Such is the life of the person who pursues empty, sinful pleasures. They build their life on a lie. So where do you seek a godly pleasure? Or where can you seek godly pleasure this week? Maybe it's a personal time of worship in the presence of God. And for me, that's worship walks. I put on my headphones and I listen to Shane and Shane. They have a great album where they sing the Psalms and they just walk around my neighborhood, worship walking the Lord, being in God's presence, experiences joy. Maybe you'll find yourself in a situation where you have to choose between righteousness and unrighteousness. You have to choose between doing what's pleasing to God or what's pleasing to yourself. By God's grace, you will choose what's pleasing to God, what is righteous, and what will follow is the joy of the Lord for doing what is right in God's eyes. Maybe it's you'll go for a walk and you'll see a blue sky in the sun, and you'll become aware of God's unexpected and undeserving grace in your life. And you'll stop and you'll praise Him and you'll experience His joy. With God, the giver of every good and perfect gift at the center of your life, it's now possible to live a truly joyful life. Not through seeking sinful pleasures, but through godly joy, seeking godly joy. Seek this, not that. Seek godly joy, not sinful pleasures. Let's pick it up in verse 17, and I'm going to read verses 17 through 26 in chapter 2 here. We'll get to our third and final biblical truth. Chapter 2, verses 17 through 26. I don't know why I started at 17 there. Okay. "So I hated life because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and the striving after the wind. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to the one who pleases God. This also is a vanity and a striving after the wind. That leads us to our third biblical truth, third point in your outline. Seek godly work, not worldly work. Seek godly work, not worldly work. Again, a summary here. Solomon's life is the life many people in our world today wish for. Okay, they want it, right? This guy has everything that you could possibly want. I mean, his work has yielded tremendous return and value. He's carried out these great projects. He's built personal monuments to himself. He's exerted power over people. He's amassed wealth. And he's asking himself, what does this all add up to? What am I toiling at? What am I striving for? What do I have to gain out of this? Well, his conclusion is that it's all futile. It's chasing after the wind. He said, all of what I've gained has been accompanied with stress and anxiety, with sleepless nights. And at the end of it all, I'm just going to die and leave it to somebody who's not going to even appreciate it. If you think about this for a second, it's actually something that is true. It's observed actually in what would be called the third generation curse. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this. It's called the third generation curse. And what it is essentially is what happens is that when somebody leaves their wealth to a second or third generation, like the majority of the time, it ends up just getting squandered. In fact, I came across this article that expanded on that concept, and here's the conclusion of the article. Most rich people don't stay rich forever. About 7 in 10 wealthy families lose their fortune by the second generation. According to a study of more than 3,200 high net worth families by the Williams Group Wealth Consultancy, by the third generation, that number has jumped to 90%. 90% of wealth is lost by the third generation. Now, they give a bunch of reasons for why they believe that is, but one of the reasons why is because the generation who inherits it didn't have to work for it, and so they waste it. They just take it for granted because it wasn't their toil that achieved all of those things. Not only that, but they grew up in a luxurious sort of life, so they never really had to work for anything. It was just all handed to them. So there's an entitlement and an expectation that they should just have this. And it's those things that lead to sort of Solomon saying that this too is meaningless, this accumulation of wealth. I'm sure we can all come up with several more reasons why the worldly view of wealth falls short, but I want you to walk away from today's sermon with understanding where you can find true meaning and lasting purpose in your work. And that happens when you get God's point of view on your work, when you infuse your work with God's purposes, with eternal purposes. I think about this summary statement of the meaning of our work from a man named Jordan Rayner, who wrote a book called Redeeming Your Time. And in this book, he says, our work matters today because it is a means of glorifying God and loving our neighbors as ourselves. But our work also matters for eternity because God can use it to build his kingdom. Jordan Rayner unlocks the key to us finding actually true satisfaction and joy and true meaning in our work in life. And that is one, seeking to glorify God in our work. Another one is seeking to love others in our work. And then the third one is storing up for ourselves treasures in heaven and not just living for the things of this world. So last week I shared with you about how God had done a work in my life that in my mid-20s I really wasn't a believer. I was a lost person, and I came to Christ and quickly realized by the grace of God that my idol was money, and that's what I was living for, and I thought that was going to bring me satisfaction in life. But there were some fundamental shifts along the way that I want to share with you in my mindset that God brought me from where I was at to where I am now by God's grace. And I hope maybe these mindsets can kind of help you Okay, the first one that he moved in me was, going from selfish ambition to selfless ambition. So I had this ambition that was quite incredible. It propelled me to tremendous success, but I was using it for my own self. It was a selfish ambition, and God convicted my heart and then moved in my heart to say, it's actually not your ambition that's wrong. It's the fact that you're using it for yourself. Like, I made you ambitious. Now you need to go and become a pastor and plant a church. Say, what, God? But he moved me from selfish ambition to selfless ambition, and that brought eternal purpose to my work. He moved me from loving people, from using people, to loving people. I saw people as transactions. They were a means to an end to get what I want, not somebody who I can use the gifts and abilities that God has given me to love them, to help them in some particular way. In that case, it was real estate. But God shifted that in my heart. From self-worth from my work to glorifying God and finding true worth in my work. God shifted in my mind. My business was called Hope Realty. And he shifted in my mind from, you know what, this is not your place of identity. This is not your place of esteem, okay? This is something that I've given you to do so that you can glorify me in it. And when you do that, you will find true worth and lasting meaning, even if you are working in real estate. So the issue is not secular versus sacred work. That's a false dichotomy. The issue is who you're working for, what you're working for. To what end are you working? To an eternal end or to a temporal ends? So I want to circle back to that question, what are you seeking? Jesus asked his disciples, what are you seeking? Now this is an awesome response here, right? Because his disciples didn't answer this question with a what. They didn't say, I'm seeking money, or I want my fishing business to multiply into multiple boats. Jesus, do you think you can do that for me? They said who they were seeking. They were seeking a Messiah. They were seeking someone who they can follow and who they can worship. And they, by God's grace, knew by seeking Christ, they would find what their heart was searching for in the world. So what are you seeking? You can be a Christian, not seeking Christ. Where does your time go? Where does your money go? Do you make decisions based off of eternity? What do you see? Let's pray. Jesus, you are all we need. When we seek you, we see life clearly, since from you comes godly wisdom. When we seek you, we experience true joy that sinful pleasures cannot possibly provide. Lord, when we seek to glorify you in our work, we experience true satisfaction and enduring and lasting meaning. Lord, help us to desire you above all else. In Jesus' name, amen.